Monday evening at the end of the day, I was watching TV, and I also had my iPad open, and I was just scrolling through Apple News, and I came across an article, and it was called, "What Americans Lost When They Stopped Going to Church," which intrigued me. I'm sure that surprises you. And I thought, I probably should read this article. So I opened it up and I started reading, and the first thing that fascinated me about this article was that it was written by an agnostic. And he says that from the beginning. He goes, look, I have no skin in the game. I really don't go to church. I don't care about going to church. But there is a problem. We've lost something. There's a cost at so many people in our country leaving churches. And so he started to articulate first the stats. And the first stat he said was, today, surveys say that a quarter of Americans no longer are affiliated with any religion. 25% of our country no longer thinks that they have any church that they belong to. It's an intentional disaffiliation, if you will. And then he says, after that, that of that number, of the 25% who no longer go to church, 2/3 of them grew up in a family that went to church, which I think is a problem. A lot of these people who don't go to church today grew up in families where religion was a major part of their life, and no longer are they going. And then after that, he says, there's no other church where evangelization is as strong as the church of people leaving churches. In other words, there's more people leaving churches today than joining Christianity in general combined. That's another big problem. And so after he explains where we are today, and he lists out a few of the problems, and the first problem is this. Again, remember, he's not a Christian writer. The first problem is that as Americans have stopped going to church, church was the place for community. And as they stopped going to church, they had nothing else to replace it with. There was no alternative to find this community. That's a big problem. We haven't replaced it with anything, he says. The second issue, the second problem, is that at the same time that people stopped going to church and experiencing community here, is the same time that technology has been booming and has caused a stark decline in face-to-face socialization. So at the same time as we're not together at church, we're also together less just because of technology. And the third problem, he says, is that churches was like a retaining wall against the individualism of our country. And so, as people have stopped going to church, we've become hyper-individualistic in the United States. And I just want to summarize for you at the very end of the article. This is the last paragraph, because I think he does a good job of explaining very briefly, succinctly here, all the things I just talked about. He says, I'm not advocating that every atheist and agnostic in America immediately choose a world religion and commit themselves to weekly church, which makes sense. He's not a churchgoer, so he doesn't want to advocate for that. But then he says, I wonder if in foregoing organized religion, an isolated country has discarded an old and proven source of ritual at a time when we most need it. Making friends as an adult can be hard. It's especially hard without a scheduled weekly reunion of congregants. Finding meaning in the world is hard too. It's especially difficult if the oldest systems of meaning-making, churches, hold less and less appeal. It took decades for Americans to lose religion. It might take decades to understand the entirety of what we lost. Whew. You know, that seems very discouraging, doesn't it? But I think it's an opportunity for us, because there are people in our world starving for community and friendship. And you know what? We have the answer. We've got the solution here. So a couple of things. After my Easter homily and I talked about it's time, come home, someone came up to me after the Mass and said, Father, thank you, but please tell us soon how to do it. You know, how to help people come back. And there's no really easy step-by-step process for how to do it, but here's my attempt at making that possible for you. First thing is we have to be willing to invite. We have to be courageous enough to call someone or text, call is always better, to actually speak to someone and say, come back, to invite them, just as Peter did in our first reading. There's St. Peter. He's preaching to the crowds, and he's telling them, the person you put to death, Jesus, he died, he suffered, he's been raised. And he forgives you, and he loves you, and repent. Repent and believe in the gospel. Peter invites these people back to the faith, to receive Jesus. And they do. They come to him, and they get baptized. The second thing for us, and this is one of the most important things, is that we have to be willing to witness. And witnessing is hard because it means sharing our heart. If you were paying attention in our first reading in our gospel, you heard that word witness several times. Jesus says at the end of the gospel, you will be my witnesses. The people at the beginning, the two people that come back and who announce to the disciples, to the apostles, that they have seen the Lord, this is an important reminder for us of what's going on. Just before this moment, we had the Road to Emmaus story. It's kind of a weird thing that our church has done. Because you know when you watch a TV show and you get to the end of the episode and it says to be continued, it's like the worst thing ever when that happens. And then you have the second episode. We had in our gospel today the second episode, but we didn't get the first. And the first episode is the Road to Emmaus. These two disciples, they're going to Emmaus. They're walking along the way. Jesus shows up. They don't recognize him. Jesus tells them about the scriptures. And eventually he breaks bread with them. And in the breaking of the bread, they see that this is the Lord. And in their excitement, they run back to Jerusalem. And we have our gospel today. We saw him in the breaking of the bread. That's how our gospel began. They witnessed to the fact that they saw Jesus. And then at the end of our gospel, Jesus says to all of them, after he says, peace be with you, and he shows them his hands and his side, you will be my witnesses. Friends, we need to be his witnesses. And I think what's challenging for us is we think that witnessing is spiritual bragging. And it's not. You need to tell people in your life what Jesus has done for you. How has Jesus loved you? How have you experienced his grace? Share that with those people in your lives. Because it's when we share how Jesus has loved me, how Jesus has changed my life, that we can express to someone and give someone else hope that if God can impact him, if God can change her life, maybe God can change mine. That's why we have to witness. That we've seen him, you can see him too. And then the third step is this: be a good salesman. You know, a good salesman knows what their customer wants. We've got the answer. We know what people want. They want community, they want friendship, they want meeting, and we have it. That's what we have at churches. We have a good community, we have friendship, we have connectedness, we have a weekly reunion of congregants, of people who care about one another, and we have Jesus Christ. We've got what people are looking for. These aren't discouraging times. This is a great opportunity. It would have been easy for the early church to say, you know what can so few people do? But the apostles and the earliest disciples, they went out and they proclaimed and they witnessed. And look where the church is today. We've got millions of Christians in the world. We can do it. We just have the faith and the courage that we can do it. So my challenge for you as we go through this Easter season is to think about people in your life that are longing for friendship and community and say, you know what? Even if you're not there yet with the church, come anyway, because you need friendship. Come and experience a God who loves you, a God who loves you through a community of believers together. And I promise you, you won't experience loneliness. You'll experience authentic friendship through a faith of believers.